Welcome to Canada Files. I'm Valerie Pringle. My guest today is Esi Edugyan, the best-selling Canadian author of Washington Black and Half-Blood Blues. Both books were shortlisted for the Man Booker and won the Giller Prize, Canada's most prestigious literary award. They were also favorite books of both Oprah and Obama. She grew up in Calgary, the daughter of immigrants from Ghana, and writes beautifully about migration, belonging, and home. Hi, Esi.
Hello.
Why are you interested in the idea of belonging? I read one piece where you're saying, is it where we are? Is it who we are? Is it who we're with?
Yeah, I think the concept of belonging really sits at the heart of my own identity. Being the child of Ghanaian immigrants, born and raised in Calgary, somebody who's traveled widely, gone out into the world, and I think having made those journeys abroad and having to really define yourself as a Canadian, as a Ghanaian Canadian, this is something that really got me thinking about, what sits at the heart of a sense of being rooted in a place. What are the things that maybe cause a sense of disinheritance, dislocation, and what are the ways in which belonging is a construct, something that ultimately isn't defined by what's outside of you, but something that you're building for yourself.
I remember talking years ago to a religious leader who said, we may think our greatest need is to be loved, but the even deeper and more profound need is to belong.
I like that. I like that very much. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think when you go through the world with a sense of dislocation or disinheritance, you really can't establish yourself. I think that any kind of impulse or creative act or even a sense of goodness, of what's possible for yourself, all of these things are rooted in a sense of knowing where it is that you belong. For me, within my own life, I think I found it challenging to maybe be established within the family that I was in. My parents made such a circuitous journey to be in Canada. So they actually were both from Ghana, from different parts of Ghana. My father was from the south, my mother was from central Ghana. They met in San Francisco, actually at a moon landing party.
Which is adorable.
Which was, yeah, it's so cute, such a wonderful meet cute. A student from Kenya was throwing a party for a bunch of his friends who were expats or African students, and they happened to meet on that night and just were connected from that moment. But they moved quite a bit. They were in New York, they were in San Francisco. They ultimately ended up in Edmonton. My father was at the University of Alberta doing I believe he was doing like postgraduate work. He became a teacher of economics, and then they moved to Calgary for a job. And they often used to joke that they had to stop moving because every time they moved, they had a child. So there was that. But I really feel like late 1970s, 80s Alberta was just, I think for somebody like me, it just felt like it was a challenge to really feel like I belonged.
Did you feel like an outsider?
I did feel very much like an outsider, and I know my siblings also went through this experience of feeling slightly disconnected or standing slightly to one side of things, even while you're very much a part of the fabric of things. You're going to the Calgary Stampede, you're eating the same food as your classmates, you're doing all of this, but you come home and it's quite different. And we felt as though we didn't quite belong in the culture of our parents, but we didn't quite belong in the culture of Alberta.
Interesting, though, is the kids feeling that. So often it's the migrant
Yeah.
that's caught between two worlds, and their kids kind of then
Yeah.
catch the slipstream and assimilate.
Yeah,
you know.
I think that that's the narrative, but I think it can happen this other way as well. But I really feel like because of that, this idea of, where am I from? Where do I belong? What is my home? These were things that I really had to come and explore and then ultimately construct for myself. So in my 20s, I applied to so many different arts residencies just because I wanted to see a bit of the world. I hadn't traveled
you
much.
saw a huge part. You did a huge amount of travel. You were
I did, yeah.
U.S., Iceland, Germany, Hungary, Finland, Spain, China.
Yeah, and
So
I think
what did that give you?
that gave me a sense of feeling very much, I guess, rooted within my Canadianness. Like, there's nothing so much to tell you that you're Canadian as going abroad and having to explain yourself as a Canadian, and having to speak about Canadian history, and also being asked outright, like, how are you Canadian and what makes a Canadian, which are impossible questions to answer, but you really start to recognize the ways in which you have been shaped and formed by your childhood experiences, by even the landscape. Like, I remember being able to leave my house and to look out, and I could see the Rockies, like, from my front stoop. It just felt like there was this grand vista rolling on, and this great sense of open skies, and you feel your smallness within the landscape. And I think that that's something that psychologically does shape you. So you start to understand the ways in which you're very much like a Western, from Western Canada, when you go out into the world.
But also, I mean, just the ancient part of European culture, and so many of the places you visited, as someone from the New World, in a sense, it's always so interesting to get a sense of that.
It is. I lived in Germany for a year, and I actually lived in the outbuildings of it's like a 17th century pleasure palace, and that was, and we're sort of overlooking the city of Stuttgart, and that was very much a different experience than anything I'd known before in my life. And what was fascinating about that was that it was a residency in which they'd invited people from all around the world who were under the age of 32, I believe was the cutoff. And so you were meeting people from everywhere, from Scandinavia, Southeast Asia, from Africa, and you all sat around this sort of long dining table for lunches, and you would just speak. And I just thought, what an education. I wish everybody could have this, to hear the perspectives of people from all different nations, and to just understand, just how much you are formed by where you're from.
When did you first see yourself as a storyteller, as a writer?
Probably, I was quite young. Yeah, I was a huge reader as a child. And I think I just started to write, like, I was quite young, probably 8 or 9 when I was writing my first stories, but it wasn't anything serious, just sort of scribbling things down.
The first novel you wrote, which is The Second Life of Samuel Tyne, won awards, good out of the gate, but then your second novel, you couldn't get a publisher.
Yeah, I think it's the case. I'm pretty sure it's still the case today. But certainly at the time when I was publishing, there was like a great thirst for new voices. There were even publishing programs devoted to just finding new writers and new voices, which was wonderful. But first novels, generally speaking, aren't huge bestsellers without some kind of major push. And even then, it's not something that's a done deal. And so Samuel Tyne sold very modestly, and if you have modest sales, it can be difficult to continue to publish. it's...
Did you think you'd quit after that when you...
I did. It was really a struggle to write something else. Like, I think, and I'm pretty sure this was the same for my contemporaries, I think we still thought we lived in the era of, you know, for instance, a publishing career like Mordecai Richler, whose third novel was the novel that sort of established him, The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. He'd written 2 previous novels that I think nobody had really paid much attention to. So I think there was this erroneous idea that this was what it was to publish, and also that you could make a living just by publishing, you know, poetry and novels, you know, short stories. Which, okay, that was something that we were disabused of in fairly short order. But yeah, I really felt myself to be in despair after publishing that novel, and I ended up writing a second novel, which was never published, actually. It's still sitting in a drawer. So to get the will and the strength to write Half-Blood Blues, it was really difficult. You know, and I credit the support of my partner for helping to sort of get me across the finish line, because I really didn't feel like I would write again.
Tell me how much you love research and how you do it, because everything is so detailed in your novels.
Yeah, I had actually a really wonderful professor of writing at the University of Victoria, Jack Hodgins, and he gave some advice, which was, he said, when you're writing a historical piece, the thing to do is to research all that you can, dig up everything, read everything, you know, go and sort of speak to whoever you can, and when you have all of that information, then when you sit down at your desk to write, forget it all. And I felt like that was amazing advice, because I think as a writer, you could just research and research and research and research and never write a word. Like, I'm somebody who would prefer probably to just research and not have to do kind of the heavy lifting of writing. But it's something that I adore. I love learning new things, new facts. I love making notes. I love speaking to people. But ultimately, when I sit at my desk, I have to forget it all.
Your desk must be really, really messy.
It's an extremely messy desk. Yeah, it's a horrifyingly messy desk.
Now, you say you have a natural curiosity about historical footnotes. I mean, your ability to research and find little known facts and stories that kind of are nuggets that inspire you. I mean, even just reading an African space program, or this ancient Chinese Navy that you've sort of, the first Black person in Canada, you seem to go down these rabbit holes of research and then find inspiration there.
Yeah, that seems to have been the way I've worked in the past. It's just because I was always reading so widely, it's been harder to read that way since having children, and since with all of the travel that's attendant with publishing. But just having read so widely, you come across these like literal footnotes in books, and you're sort of thinking, well, why is this being elided over, and who is this person? And then you can start to do more investigation, and usually that's the most interesting person or incident, and you think, why isn't this something that's more well known? And yeah, my stories just seem to flow from there.
Washington Black took 7 years.
Yeah.
Again, started by a footnote, and then it's called epic. I mean, it's compared to Moby Dick as sort of a yarn, a real yarn.
Yeah, that was something that, it started as a footnote, but there was a whole kind of confluence of things that came together. I remember reading, like several years ago, probably a decade ago, reading a short story by Jorge Luis Borges about a man called Andrew Bogle, who'd been an enslaved man, but in this story, he's this mastermind who orchestrates this whole swindle that kind of takes over England in the 19th century. And it's a delightful story. And I thought that it was completely, made up, as one would, because it's a fiction. But I was walking through the National Portrait Gallery in London, and I turned, and there suddenly was a portrait of Andrew Bogle. There was a portrait of all of these people involved in the swindle, and I thought, oh my gosh, this was a real story.
And it's being turned into a TV series?
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sterling K. Brown is producing?
Yes, that's right. And
Are you involved?
I'm involved only insofar as I've read some of the scripts, but I'm not a screenwriter, so I'm not writing any of it.
Is this making you happy or making you nervous? Or?
TV is such a different medium, and they're all just incredible writers and performers, and I'm just really excited to see how they interpret the material.
You chaired the Booker jury 2023. You've read 160 books.
Yes.
Was this interesting? Why would you do that? It takes so much time. Do you learn more about the whole game of how these things work, or what was the takeaway from that?
Yeah, the Booker it's a prize that I've been nominated for or shortlisted for twice, and so I was kind of interested to kind of peek underneath the hood and see how things worked. But also I was just curious to see, it's very rare, I think, that a writer gets a chance to get a full picture of what's being published or gets translated into English, all around the world for a year. It was like a snapshot of what's the best literature being published all around the world for this year, and being able to see how others were working, what were some of the main concerns that were being shared, I guess, across nations, just all of these things. And also the pleasure of getting to discuss literature with people who are very much steeped in it themselves, but coming from different artistic disciplines. I thought that would be really interesting. I don't think I understood that it would be all-consuming. I didn't write a word for a whole year. I was just reading. If you do the math, it ends up being almost a book a day that you're reading. And some of these books are quite long. So yeah, I felt there was never a moment when I wasn't reading, never a waking moment when I wasn't reading. And so it was overwhelming, but it was so pleasurable, and what a gift to get to engage with the best that world literature has to offer.
You're married to a writer.
I am. Yeah.
Poet. How is that? Is your house big enough for two writers, or how does
barely.
that go?
Yeah, it's actually been it's been good. We've been each other's first editors. We've been each other's best editors. He began as a poet, but he very quickly became a novelist as well.
So yeah, nobody's sort of arguing about who's won what prize, or who's got more quiet, or who has to take the kids.
Well, there are always those arguments, I think, in any household when you have two working parents, especially when your job occasions, such travel. We're constantly traveling when we have books that are out, and so we now have a kind of pact where we can't publish in the same year just because somebody has to be home.
What are you working on now?
I'm working on a few things. I've got a novel for children, like a middle grade reader that I'm working on.
Because you've written one children's book already. Yeah.
Yes, I did a picture book, which was actually such a pleasure to travel with that book and speak to very young audiences. And I've also got another novel for adults. Yes, a follow-up to Washington Black. And I've given myself the challenge of not being so deeply historical. I felt like there was a trend where I started with Samuel Tyne, writing about the 1960s, then leaping back into Half-Blood Blues, which was writing about, early 20th century, so starting in 1920 and going to, I guess that novel goes to 1990, but and then going to Washington Black, which was set in the 1830s. I thought, okay, I'm just going to keep, delving so far back. But I thought, okay, I'm going to write something that feels a little bit more current, a little bit more contemporary, And that's been a pleasure, like something within my own living memory, which I think means less research, but it also has other challenges as well.
In a male voice as well? You've got that male voice down.
No, not in a male
really?
voice.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah, not in a male voice. That's another challenge, I think, to set
be a
for
woman?
myself. To write in a female voice from a female perspective. I think that's something that's, just something I wanted to do.
Do you ever still wonder now, you say you had sort of despair after not finding a publisher at one point, to think, books, what's the point? Or is there any choice that you have about that?
You know, I think probably every writer goes through that I know in our household it seems like every book is like, every time we sit down to write a book you think, what's the point of this? Who's going to read this? Everybody's telling you that nobody reads anymore. It's all about Netflix and all of these things. But I think, I think that books are the thing that sort of raised me and gave me such joy and pleasure as a child and showed me completely different worlds and allowed me to imagine like going out into the world and experiencing it, seeing other countries, other cultures, that this was something that lived beyond the page, and it gave me that courage and that perspective. And I think as an adult, it's the same thing. Like I still have that desire to learn and to travel and to experience life in another's skin through reading. So I'm never without a book, fiction, nonfiction. I'll read anything, and so I feel like there's a certain power in the written word that it's doing something different than television, for all of the beauty and of certain televised series, the way that they're written in such a novelistic, beautiful, easily accessed way. I feel like there's something very different going on with a novel. I think the engagement with language, it takes you to a quieter place.
One of my favorite lines of yours, which I'd written down ages ago, it's from Half-Blood Blues, and it says, the cabbie's eyes sort of glazed over. Canada kills any conversation quick, I learned a long time ago. It's a little trick of mine. I love that. I thought, really, so we're so boring. People go like, oh, okay, you're Canadian. Snore.
I remember those lunches that I was talking to you about in Germany, and sitting at the table with people from all other nations. And there was this lovely American woman, and she'd just sit across from me, and she'd just say, it's Canada. There's not much that you can kind of...
What's more to say?
Yeah, like what more is there to say? You probably have nothing interesting to tell me because, not much going on there,
Well, you nailed it with that line. So anyway, from there we segue, because the final question we always ask people is, what does being Canadian mean to you?
I think for me, being Canadian means holding on to these central tenets of which we all seem to agree are of huge importance to us, which are access to universal health care, access to education, that these are things that we fundamentally believe everybody has a right to, and that this isn't something that we should just let fall by the wayside. Otherwise, I think we are just an amazing nation of, it's so geographically diverse, so culturally diverse. It's an enormous landmass, it's unwieldy, it's, I imagine, so difficult to govern, and there are just so many different communities with different needs. And so, but somehow it all holds together, and it's beautiful, and we we're not afraid to recognize and look at our difficult histories while also admitting that it's hard to figure out exactly how to reckon with that past. But you know, I feel like we're a nation that is fundamentally committed to allowing people to try and live out their best lives, failing probably, but maybe something we can all agree on is that maybe we're trying to commit to that.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Canada Files.
The preceding program was made possible through the generous support of the Browning Watt Foundation, as well as the following donors: Ted and Alice Kernahan, the Linwood Family Foundation, Jim and Sandy Treliving, Tony and Sherry Fell, Richard Pilasoff, Michael McCain and family, Richard Wernham and Julia West, Mary Davey, Clench House Foundation, Bryce and Nikki Douglas, the 63 Foundation, David and Cheryl Carr, the Sheila and David Wilson Foundation, and by the Central Canadian Public Television Association.